There was a time in America where coupes were incredibly popular, but today there aren't as many coupes available. And if you're looking for a coupe that won't break the bank, you have very few options in America. And one of them, and I think one of the best options right now, is this 2019 Honda Civic. At the moment, if you're looking for a true traditional two-door coupe that has a trunk in the back and only two doors, then this is going to be the least expensive option in America. That's because something like the Hyundai Veloster, that's really a hot hatch. And I can't really call the two-door version of the Volkswagen Golf a coupe because it has a very square hatch in the back. Aside from the Honda Civic, if you're looking for an affordable two-door vehicle in America, then you'll be looking at something like the Toyota 86, the Subaru BRZ, or perhaps a Mustang or a Camaro. But those are going to be considerably more expensive than this, especially the Camaro and the Mustang, because this starts just over $20,000. 2019 brings us a refresh of the coupe and the sedan versions of the Civic, but for some reason not the hatchback. So up front we get a slight variation of the theme that we had in 2018. Since we're driving the top-end touring version of the coupe, we have full LED headlamps here. They definitely have a very solid Acura look to them, and then we have fog lamps down below. For 2019, not too much has changed for this top-end touring trim. We still have Honda sensing, we still have their lane watch system rather than a more traditional blind spot monitoring system. The bigger change is in the absolute base trim of the Civic, which now gets Honda sensing standard. That's Honda's all-encompassing active safety system that gives us collision warning, autonomous braking, radar adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assistance, etc. Up front, we definitely have an aggressive wedge look, and then back here we have a look that reminds me a little bit of the Civic hatchback, but as you can see, we have a traditional trunk back here, not a lift back like we find in that model. At 177.3 inches long, this is significantly shorter than a Camaro or a Mustang, more than a full foot shorter. But because Honda is very focused on overall practicality, and this is a front-wheel drive vehicle, not a rear-wheel drive vehicle designed for a big engine, we have more than 7 inches more combined legroom in the Civic than we find in the Camaro or the Mustang. In fact, we only have a slight reduction in terms of overall legroom versus the Civic sedan. You only lose about an inch overall for this versus the four-door model. That makes this quite easily one of the most practical two-door vehicles available in America. Out back, we find combination LED tail lamp modules, so the brake lights and the center brake light and accent strip that runs right there across the top of the trunk, those are LEDs. And then we have incandescent backup lights and turn signals in that module. Those are part of the body, not part of the trunk lid, as you can see right there. Because of the design changes for the coupe, we do have an opening that is a little bit smaller than the Civic sedan's trunk, and of course a trunk that's a little bit smaller overall as well. Under the hood, we have the same engine lineup as the Civic sedan, which is a little bit different than the Civic hatchback. Things start out with a 2-liter naturally aspirated engine. You'll find that in the LX and, oddly enough, in the Sport trims. That produces 158 horsepower and 138 pound-feet of torque. It's the only version of the Civic Coupe that you can get with a 6-speed manual for 2019. You can also get an optional CVT in that model if you want better fuel economy. Then we have this engine right here. It's Honda's excellent 1.5-liter turbo. It produces 174 horsepower and 162 pound-feet of torque. Oddly enough, in real-world driving, the best fuel economy is going to be with this 1.5-liter turbo, even though it produces more horsepower and more torque than the naturally aspirated 2-liter. I'm not entirely clear why this engine isn't the engine in the Sport trim, however, because the Sport trim gets a slightly tweaked suspension, definitely feels a little bit more nimble out on the road than what we're driving today. Now, this is a little bit different than what we find in the Civic hatchback lineup, where the Sport does get the turbocharged engine. So if you're looking for a Sport trim Civic with the turbo, that would be the hatch. If you're looking for the Sport trim that's a little bit less expensive, that would be in the coupe or in the sedan. A lot of folks over at facebook.com/AlexNautos have been asking me about possible oil dilution issues with Honda's 1.5-liter turbo. You may recall that there has been a manufacturer recall on some of these engines to attempt to address this particular problem. Now, I'm not terribly concerned because my use case, and most use cases out there, to be perfectly honest, would never put this engine in a situation where that could happen. Oil dilution by the gasoline is something that can happen in a lot of modern direct injection high compression engines that are really designed for efficiency, like this 1.5-liter turbo right here. Basically what happens is gasoline will slip down the walls of the cylinder and into the oil pan. Now, for most of us, that's not really going to be a problem because we're going to get the engine up to operating temperature and then the gasoline is going to be consumed. It's not going to hang out there in the oil. The oil dilution issues seem to really focus on a very specific kind of customer, the person that takes their Civic out in cold weather, we're talking below 32 degrees, very, very short trips, and never lets the engine get up to operating temperature. So if that describes you, then maybe you want to look at the 2-liter engine instead of the 1.5-liter turbo, but for most of us, it's not really going to be a problem. As I said before, the structure of the coupe is similar to, but not identical to, the sedan. So we have a very different kind of door opening here. The roof line definitely is a little bit different, and that results in a slightly more reclined seating position for the driver. We also don't have a powered seat, even in this top-end touring trim. It is still a manual seat to allow easier entry into the second row. Although power seats are generally more adjustable, they don't move as quickly for people to hop into the rear. So that is sort of an advantage here, but also a disadvantage. We don't have any adjustable lumbar support in this particular seat design, but we do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. Overall, I find these seats just a little bit less comfortable than what we find in the Civic sedan or hatchback, but very comparable to the two-door competition. Definitely find these more comfortable than the seats that we find in the 86 or the BRZ. The two front seats don't move in the same manner. The driver's seat simply tilts forward. It does not tilt and slide forward easily at the press of a lever like the passenger side seat does. And there's also a little foot lever down there to allow me to escape just a little bit more easily. As you can see, legroom is really not a problem for the Civic Coupe. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks. It was adjusted for a 6'4" person I had in the vehicle earlier. I still have about 1.5 inches of legroom left. Headroom is really the trouble back here because we have that very coupe-like profile, sort of the double wedge look that I mentioned earlier. Headroom is definitely limited. I'm slouching in this seat. I still have that inch of legroom left. If I were to put my butt back into place, you can see that I just couldn't fit back here. It's just not designed for taller adults. Now, why might you want a coupe with excellent legroom that didn't have the headroom to back it up? Well, child seats would be one big reason. Even though it's going to be a lot harder to get kids in the seats back here, there is enough room for some of those larger child seats. And depending on how tall you are, you might even be able to fit a rear-facing child seat back here. Another touch that could be handy in a pinch is this center seat belt back here. Theoretically, you could put 5 in the Civic Coupe. The rear bench is about as wide as the Civic sedan, so overall width is going to be just about as comfortable as that compact sedan, but you can see the headroom is even more limited back here in the middle. When creating the Civic Coupe, Honda didn't just take a middle section of the vehicle and delete it. They altered the overall structure of the Civic itself, giving us a very different trunk back here. And it's a little bit smaller than the sedan, 11.9 cubic feet here, 15.1 in the sedan, and about half the size in terms of cargo capacity as the Civic hatchback. On the other hand, even though the Civic Coupe is significantly shorter than a Camaro or a Mustang, this cargo area compares incredibly well. Taking a quick spin around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end touring trim, so we have a pretty standard-sized moonroof right there over the driver and front passengers' heads. Because of the design of this moonroof, keep in mind that it does affect overall headroom. Up front, we have two-way adjustable headrests. This model has leather upholstery. You can see we have a perforated center section and then a fabric insert right there in the middle of that back to give it a little bit more visual interest. These seats are heated, but they're not ventilated. Honda also incorporates that fabric strip in the seat bottom cushion to help tie things together. And moving over to the front doors, we find the same sort of build quality that we find in the Honda Civic sedan. So we have some hard touch plastics and some soft plastics. There's a bottle holder down there at the bottom of the door. And we find a combination of different materials going on in here. Some of that metal effect trim right there on the door and around that door handle. And then as we move on over to the dashboard, we find imitation wood trim. Or at least that's what I'm calling what's going on the dashboard. Let me know what you think this is down there in the comments section below. It's a plastic piece, but it has this definite texture, but it also has sort of a linear grain that you would normally see in wood trims in car interiors. Whatever it is, I have to say that I like the look overall. We also have some imitation stitching on the soft touch dashboard section to dress it up a little bit. And then we have a pretty large glove compartment below that. I had no problem fitting larger tablet computers inside. In the center of the dash, we find Honda's refreshed infotainment system. It offers a tweak of the software, and then we have some physical buttons and a power and volume knob over here. So if you've been waiting for a Civic with more buttons, then this is definitely the model for you. You can see the software looks very similar to the previous generation, but we're told it has been modified for 2019. Since we're in the top-end touring trim, below that we find the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control. Under the climate controls, we find a storage area where you can easily put your larger smartphone. There's a cord pass-through to the USB ports that are in the cubby below that. The storage area below that could very easily fit things like smartphones right down there. You could also put smaller purses, large wallets, that sort of thing down there out of the way. We have a pretty traditional console shifter right here. Drive is all the way back there, and then Sport is one notch behind. We have an Econ button over there, the automatic brake hold enable disable button, and then an electric parking brake switch. The Coupe features the same versatile center console design as the sedan. We have an armrest that slides forward and backward like that and lifts up out of the way in its most rearward position. The sides of the center console area are soft touch material, so that way if you put your elbow on it, it doesn't feel like you're sort of bridging the divide with a hard plastic area. We have cup holders that can slide forward and backward like that, and they are accessible with this armrest in its rearward position. You can also completely remove them. If I pull that little clip right there, I can just pull the cup holders out. Then you can see I have one large cup holder divot right there up front. That would be usable if I were to put this cup holder in its most rearward position. Then I could put 3 drinks, one of them being a very large drink up front. We then have this little tray here that slides forward and backward as well, and can also be completely removed from the equation. Over on the driver's side, we have a partial LCD instrument cluster. So we have some digital gauges, but not LCD gauges over here on the left and on the right for the fuel gauge and the engine temperature. And then everything else is being delivered by a color LCD in the middle. This is a similar design to what we've seen in other Honda products. It gives us track information from our connected smartphone right there. We can also change to different screens, whether we want maintenance information, the status of the active safety systems, turn-by-turn navigation directions, a turbo boost readout, fuel economy, etc. If, like me, you were not a huge fan of Honda's touch volume slider on their steering wheels, then don't worry, we don't have one here. This is a traditional volume up-down button, even though it looks very much like that touch slider. Over here we have a joystick-style control that acts as track forward, backward, and it also controls that multifunction LCD along with this little button right here. We then have a dedicated voice button, phone hang-up and pick-up buttons, and then on the right side of the steering wheel we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control and lane keeping assistance system. These are standard on all models of the Civic. Honda's 1.5-liter turbo engine is one of my favorites on the market right now. It's compact, it's lightweight, it's very fuel efficient, and performance is excellent. Honda also has one of the best CVTs out on the market right now. In our test, 0 to 60 took 6.6 seconds in this model, making it notably faster than the average mainstream compact vehicle in America. This is significantly faster, for instance, than any version of the Toyota Camry, and quite similar to something like an Elantra Sport. In fact, although Honda does not like to be reminded of this, in this generation of the Civic, there is a lot less daylight in terms of overall performance between the regular versions of the Civic and the Civic Si. Now this is still a CVT, so it's not quite as engaging as an automatic transmission or a manual, and if we use the paddle shifters on the steering wheel, although we do get fixed ratios, the shifts do not feel like a traditional transmission. They are just a little bit mushy compared to that. However, what I like about this CVT is that compared to the Nissan CVTs, Toyota CVTs, and Subaru CVTs, this changes ratios much more rapidly. So if we're driving calmly out here, 40 miles an hour, engine spinning, say 1200 RPM, if I floor it, we get what feels more like a traditional automatic transmission shift, then we get acceleration. So it doesn't feel rubber bandy like the Nissan automatic transmission can. In our braking tests, this model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 121 feet. That is longer than something like the Civic Si, and the biggest reason for that is likely the tires that we have on this model. But as far as the competition goes, this is still very good for the mainstream compact segment. No Civic would be complete without excellent handling dynamics, and that is certainly something that we still find in this vehicle for 2019. This suspension also doesn't seem to be quite as upset over broken pavement as we find in the Mazda 3, even though the suspension seems to be a little bit firmer tuned than what we see in the Mazda. That's why even in this trim, I'm certainly going to give handling an A. This definitely excels above just about everything outside of the more sporty-oriented set like the Elantra Sport, the Civic Si, the Civic Type R, etc. But it's worth noting that if you're looking for a 2-door vehicle, there is no 2-door Elantra, and there's also no 2-door Civic Type R, just the Si. And that's why I have to say that, again, I'm a little bit surprised that there isn't more daylight between this and the Si. It's not that the Si isn't fun. It is absolutely unquestionably fun. But if the previous generation Si was a 9.5 on the scale and the previous generation Civic was a 7, this generation is a 9 and the new Si is a 9.5. There's just less difference between this and the next step up. Out on a rougher road like we're on here, it's obvious that Honda has more sporting intentions with all versions of the Civic, including this Coupe, because the Coupe, the sedan, and the hatchback are all just a little bit firmer than some of the other alternatives in this segment. And the Coupe definitely feels firmer than the sedan. So if you're looking for a more comfortable Civic, that would be the sedan. If you're looking for perhaps the more sporty styled Civic, that would be this model right here. Although again, overall handling and overall acceleration are not vastly different between this and the sedan. Now that's not to say that the Civic is too firm for a daily driver. This is still definitely daily driver suitable. It's just that it's on the firm side of that spectrum. In our cabin noise tests, we got 72 decibels inside this cabin, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a B+. There are some quieter entries in this segment. I do find that the new Mazda 3 is a little bit quieter out on the road, but overall, this does very well for itself. In kind of an odd twist, our cabin noise scores are a little bit different between this and the sedan. The sedan was a little bit quieter, and that surprised me because this interior is a little bit smaller overall, so I had expected it to have a little bit more isolation between the cabin and the road. When it comes to fuel economy, this gets an A without a doubt. We've been averaging 34.5 miles per gallon, which is right around what the EPA says you should get. And I have been driving this an awful lot harder than we've been driving other cars out there. If you treat the Civic with the 1.5-liter turbo gently, you should have no problem getting high 30s in terms of overall fuel economy. And obviously, the more time you spend in town, in stop-and-go traffic, etc., or driving on mountain roads like this, the lower your fuel economy is going to be. Overall, there's a reason that the Civic is often used as a benchmark in this segment. The Civic just does everything very, very well. The overall steering feel, the handling, the cabin noise, the ride, etc., everything is very, very well balanced in the Civic. Although there are alternatives out there that will beat the Civic in certain areas, handle better, accelerate faster, etc., there are very few alternatives that are as well balanced as this model. This section is going to be pretty short because, honestly, there's really nothing else like the Honda Civic Coupe out there in America. There once was a time where we had two-door versions of just about everything on sale, but those days are long since gone. With a starting price of $20,950, the Civic is by far the least expensive traditional coupe that you can buy in America. And the price range is pretty narrow because even if you get the Civic Si with the factory performance package, that ends up right around $29,000. If you want a new two-door coupe and you want to spend under $30,000, you have very few options in America. There are about 6 things that you could get. The Civic, which starts under $21,000, is obviously the least expensive option, as I said. We then jump up about 20% or so into the Camaro for $25,000 starting. That $25,000 starting price in a Camaro is about the same price as a very nicely loaded Honda Civic. So you have to decide whether you want the features that you'd see in the Civic or the rear-wheel drive nature of the Camaro. A lot of the other options here are going to cost even more. The Mustang is going to start just around $27,000, right where the Honda Civic Touring ends. So again, if you want things like leather, the automatic transmission, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, all those various features that we find in that top-end Touring trim of the Civic, that's going to be about the same price as an absolute base Mustang with the manual transmission. Also around that same price tag is the BRZ or Toyota 86, and the Dodge Challenger will really top out this segment starting at $29,340. If you're looking for an affordable two-door vehicle in America, those are really your only options. And outside of these, we end up in the luxury segment, where there are still a decent number of options to choose from. Most of those other options are going to at least start well over $50,000. Bottom line for the Civic is that it's a practical and affordable coupe for 2020, of course, as far as coupes go. Because keep in mind that the Honda Civic sedan is going to give you very similar fuel economy and have an awful lot more room on the inside. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and click those related videos on the side of your screen right now if you haven't already done so. You should also stay tuned because we will be driving the new Honda Civic Si very, very soon. Stay tuned for that short drive video coming out over the next few weeks or so. You can also find us over at facebook.com/AlexNauto so you can see what we're driving this week, and I'll see you all later.